A 19-year-old girl disappeared from her home under strange circumstances, and her car was found abandoned in the middle of a bridge. The police attempted to find her, but all their efforts led to a dead end. This continued until there was a highly unexpected turn in the case, which shocked the detectives to their core and helped them discover the truth. Sarah Stern was born on March 24, 1997, in the small American town of Neptune, New Jersey. From a young age, she was passionate about art and loved to draw. Sarah was also active in sports. In high school, she was part of the swimming and softball teams. When she was 16, Sarah's family faced tragedy. Her mother died of cancer, leaving the girl to live with her father. She also had a dog named Buddy, whom Sarah loved dearly. After graduating from high school, she decided to pursue a career in the creative field and enrolled in a local college to study art and television production. She also began to think about moving and was seriously considering moving to Canada after completing her studies. In December 2016, when Sarah was 19, her father left town for a few days, and she stayed home alone. She planned to spend time with friends and relax over the upcoming weekend. However, her plans were not meant to be. Around 2:30 a.m. on December 3, a taxi driver called the police. He reported that as he was driving over a bridge above the river, he saw an empty car on the side of the road. Finding this odd, he decided to call 911, and the police sent an officer to the location. Approaching the car, the officer discovered that it was unlocked, and the keys were in the ignition. Upon checking the vehicle's registration, the officer found that the car belonged to 86-year-old Lily Stern, and the officers went to her house. However, she said that her granddaughter, Sarah, used the car. The grandmother tried to call her, but Sarah didn't pick up the phone. They went to her house, but the girl was not there either. With the scant information available, the police immediately formed a grim theory. They did not rule out the possibility that Sarah might have intentionally gone to the bridge, abandoned the car, and jumped down. Nevertheless, they began to explore other theories. The police decided to reconstruct the timeline of the previous day's events and find out what Sarah had been doing. They did not rule out the possibility that she might have simply stayed overnight with someone and began checking all her friends. The investigators found out that Sarah had spent most of the day with her best friend, Liam. Early in the morning, the police went to his house. The guy said he hadn't seen Sarah since the previous evening. They had spent the first half of the day at her house, after which Liam went to work the night shift, and he hadn't contacted her since. The police also asked him if Sarah had any problems or difficulties, and here Liam told them a lot of interesting things. Sarah and the boy had been best friends since the first grade, with the girl sharing her experiences with him. According to the boy, the loss of her mother had a very serious impact on her, and since then, she had been in a depressed, even depressive state. For this reason, he did not exclude the possibility that his friend could indeed have done something irreversible. However, Liam had another theory. Sarah often spoke about her dream of moving to Canada as soon as possible. Just a few weeks before her disappearance, she posted on social media that the move might happen sooner than she thought. Based on this, the boy speculated that Sarah might have run away from all the problems that had accumulated over the past few years and gone to Toronto, cutting off contact with her relatives and close friends. After talking to Liam, the police learned something else. They spoke with Sarah's neighbor, who said that on that day, the girl came to her with a strange request. She brought a box of her deceased mother's belongings and asked to keep them at her house without explaining why. Since the neighbor was friends with Sarah's mother, she agreed without any questions. The woman's daughter also told the officers that during Sarah's visit, they had arranged to meet in the evening, but Sarah never showed up. The detectives found Sarah's actions quite strange, given the circumstances of her disappearance. The fact that she suddenly decided to hand over her mother's belongings to her mother's friend only strengthened the theory of her fleeing or committing an even more fatal act. While some officers tried to determine whether Sarah had left town, others organized a search operation. They decided to comb the river under the bridge in search of the body. But they faced a serious problem: the very strong current. Assuming Sarah ended up in the water around 2 in the morning, by morning she would have been carried several kilometers away. Despite this, they brought in divers and started gathering volunteers who were to search both banks and the surrounding area. The girl's father, who was hundreds of kilometers away from home, immediately returned to the city and joined the search. He appeared in front of journalists asking anyone with any information about his daughter's disappearance to share it and help find her. That same day, officers went back to Liam. They wanted to know the detailed timeline of Sarah's disappearance day and understand if there were any other hints in her behavior and actions about what she might be planning to do. The boys shared that they spent most of the time at her house, playing video games. The only time they went out was after the girl had dropped off her mother's belongings with the neighbor. They drove to Taco Bell and then returned to her house. When asked about Sarah's emotional state, Liam shared some concerning information. According to the boy, after her mother's death, the girl once tried to do something irreversible to herself, but she survived that attempt. Liam also mentioned that one of the reasons for Sarah's depressed state was her troubled relationship with her father. After her mother's death, she left Sarah a certain amount of money, and Sarah told Liam that her father was taking some of these funds without asking. Because of this, she didn't trust him and was even more eager to move to Canada as soon as possible. The police talked to the neighbors, and in one of the houses, they noticed a security camera that had a view of Sarah's home. After reviewing the footage, they confirmed Liam's story. He and Sarah were seen leaving her house and coming back. Later, around 5 in the evening, the boy left for work. At 11:45 p.m., Sarah's grandmother's car was seen leaving Sarah's house, and the police had almost no doubt that Sarah was driving. Just a few hours later, when they came to her house, the girl was already gone, and she hadn't been captured on camera since the middle of the day. All this led the investigators to the disheartening thought that Sarah might have indeed jumped off that bridge. While divers unsuccessfully attempted to find the girl or her belongings in the river, the police continued talking to Sarah's friends and invited a guy named Preston to the station. He lived in the same house as Liam, and they all went to school together. The guy was also friends with Sarah and even went to prom with her. Preston told the police that the girl indeed had destructive thoughts and confirmed Sarah's problems with her father. Considering all this, he did not exclude the possibility that she might have done something irreversible or run away from home to Canada. At the end of the conversation with the officers, Preston broke down in tears, and the police let him go. The detectives continued to look for new leads and examined Sarah's room. There they found all her documents, as well as Canadian currency. This only confirmed their doubts that the girl could have fled to another country. In such a case, she clearly could not have left her documents at home. They also recalled Liam's words about the mother leaving Sarah a significant amount of money and decided to dig in this direction. The police learned that the girl had a bank safe deposit box where there was $25,000. It was a significant amount, but the money remained there after her disappearance. If the girl had planned to flee to another country, she would almost certainly have taken it from there. But the discoveries didn't stop there. The detectives found out that Sarah had visited her bank branch on December 2, the day of her disappearance. They obtained footage from the surveillance camera and saw that the girl had entered there for a few minutes, but the purpose of her visit remained unknown. Given that she was with Liam at the time, the police contacted him again and asked why he hadn't mentioned that Sarah had gone into the bank. The boy confirmed that they had gone there together and added that he had already mentioned this in a conversation with other officers. Liam also said he didn't know why she decided to go there, but noted that she regularly withdrew money from her account. Besides, he detailed how Sarah came into possession of this money. This happened just a few months before her disappearance. The girl, along with Liam, went to the house that belonged to her deceased mother to sort through some things. There, Sarah found a shoebox stuffed with cash. Throughout her life, her mother had consistently set aside a small part of her earnings, and before her death, she put all the accumulated money in this box to give to Sarah. Apparently, the woman didn't manage to do this, and her daughter discovered them only 3 years later. All these bills were quite old, so the girl decided to deposit most of them in the bank and spent the rest on her needs. The police understood that Sarah was unlikely to have run away to another country without this money, especially without her documents, so they almost entirely ruled out the possibility of her moving to Canada. The second possibility, that the girl might have jumped into the river, was also becoming increasingly doubtful. Investigators spoke with other friends and acquaintances of Sarah, and all of them claimed that she was quite a happy person. None of them noticed any signs of depression or destructive behavior. On the contrary, some friends noted that after her mother's death, Sarah began to appreciate life even more. Her father denied that there were any problems in their relationship. The man stated that he never took money from her, nor did he notice anything in her behavior that would indicate depression. Despite all this, the search for the girl day after day did not yield any results. Divers could not find either her body or any belongings. Investigators conceded that by this time, she could have been carried far out to sea by the current, and in such a case, they almost had no chance of finding her. This continued for more than a month. Friends and relatives of the girl did not give up hope that Sarah could be found alive, but 5 weeks after her disappearance, a very unexpected turn occurred. A guy named Anthony, a former classmate of Sarah's and a good friend of Liam's, approached the detectives. He was interested in filmmaking, especially in horror movies. Liam, who also loved this genre, constantly helped his friend come up with various plots that he could bring to the screen. Just a few weeks before Sarah's disappearance, Liam had told him a new plot about a boy who strangled his girlfriend and dumped her body off a bridge. At the time, Anthony didn't suspect anything amiss. His friend constantly shared various plots with him, and this was just one of them. After Sarah disappeared, he hadn't even heard about the incident for some time. They weren't close friends in school, and after it ended, they stopped communicating altogether. However, Liam started acting strangely, repeatedly messaging him to ask if the police had contacted him. At first, Anthony didn't understand how this could be related to him. But when he learned that Sarah had disappeared in the middle of a bridge, he remembered his friend's story, and it struck him. He went to the police and shared this story, after which the detectives realized they were likely dealing with a murder. But they had several serious problems. First, they still hadn't found Sarah's body. Second, even if Liam had indeed killed her, there wasn't a single piece of evidence against him, making it impossible to hold him accountable. So, they began to develop a plan and asked Anthony for help. The only hope to uncover the truth was to get a confession, so investigators suggested the boy try to get his friend to talk. First, they tried to get a confession over the phone. Anthony, in the presence of the police, called Liam on speakerphone and told him his camera broke, and he urgently needed money. He asked his friend if he could lend him a considerable amount. The detectives concocted this story, suspecting that Liam might have had a financial motive for the murder and obtained some of Sarah's money. However, Liam immediately responded that it would be better to meet and discuss everything in person. The police realized he was wary of wiretapping, so they had to devise a new plan. They asked Anthony to go to the meeting with his friend and continue playing out the story about the broken camera, as well as try to steer the conversation towards Sarah. Detectives quickly installed a hidden camera in his car, and Anthony went to the designated place. He parked, and soon Liam got into his car. To Anthony's surprise, the first thing he did was search for bugs. Liam said the FBI was tracking him, and he needed to make sure their conversation wasn't being overheard. He inspected part of the car near his seat, and also felt Anthony's clothing but couldn't find the hidden camera. After that, he apologized to his friend and said he needed to be cautious. Anthony played along and asked what was going on. Liam immediately began to talk, and his story shocked not only his friend but also the detectives listening to every word. Liam revealed that the entire situation with Sarah had been planned by him months before it happened. He knew the police would question him, so his main task was to divert suspicion away from himself. He then admitted that the worst part of the whole situation was that he had expected to obtain much more money. He hoped to find around $100,000 at Sarah's home, or at least half that amount, but in the two safes he took, there was only $10,000. Liam also complained that the money was very worn, and he was afraid to use it because the police might recognize it. Anthony continued to play along and asked where he kept the money. Liam said he initially kept the money at his home, but decided to hide it because he no longer trusted Preston. Anthony immediately asked why Preston was involved. Liam responded that Preston had helped him carry out the whole scheme. He added that a few hours ago, they tried to rob a local drug dealer and broke into his house, but the man had recently moved out. Liam said they dropped Sarah's body off the bridge, and it had not surfaced anywhere yet. Anthony asked almost no questions, but Liam continued to talk. Liam then shifted the conversation to what happened that day. He recounted that Sarah went to the bank and withdrew some money. They returned to her house and counted the bills, after which Sarah took them and headed to the door. At that moment, Liam approached her from behind and started to strangle her. He was worried about the reaction of her dog, but the dog just watched the events unfold without barking. Liam hoped the murder would take only a few minutes, but Sarah kept breathing. So he took her shirt and stuffed a piece of it in her mouth. He even set a timer on his phone, and the whole process took almost half an hour. After killing her, he dragged her body to the bathroom and went to work to create an alibi. On the way, he discovered he had lost his phone and realized he probably dropped it at Sarah's house. Preston then became involved in the story. While Liam was at work, Preston sneaked into Sarah's house and dragged her body from the bathroom to the bushes. Liam was afraid his phone would be found in Sarah's house, so he left work several times briefly to look for it. All this time, he communicated with his friend using walkie-talkies they had bought in advance. Eventually, he found the smartphone on the lawn in front of Sarah's house. At night, when his shift ended, he returned to Sarah's house. Aware of the neighbor's camera, he always stayed out of its view. Liam placed his friend's body in the front seat of her car and drove to the bridge, where Preston was supposed to meet him. Waiting for a moment when there were no other cars around, Liam began to pull out the body but overestimated his strength. Despite Sarah being relatively light, he struggled to move her. Just as he managed to get her out of the passenger seat, 3 cars appeared before the bridge. Liam quickly started pulling her back in, but he twisted his ankle and feared the other drivers would notice. However, he managed to place the body back just seconds before the cars passed by. By then, Preston had arrived at the bridge and helped Liam drop Sarah's body into the water. After finishing his confession, Liam stated that he wasn't the only one he had told about it. He again complained about getting significantly less money than he had planned, but said the amount would still allow him to live pleasurably and throw parties with friends for some time. Liam hoped that the whole story with Sarah was over and that the police would never be able to reach him. After hearing his story, Anthony said he needed to go home. They said goodbye and Liam exited his car. Having recorded the confession on camera, the detectives immediately went to Preston and brought him in for questioning. As soon as the young man heard about Liam's confession, he began to speak. He confirmed his friend's story and admitted that they had together dumped Sarah's body into the river. Then he detailed how he and Liam planned and executed the crime, agreeing to go to Sarah's house to show exactly where her body lay and how he dragged it into the bushes. The young man also led them to a wooded area where they hid Sarah's safe, and the police found her money there. With the confession and evidence in hand, the police arrested both young men. When Liam was brought to the station and officers took his belongings, they found Sarah's safe key on his keychain. Notably, during interrogation, Liam claimed that he had not actually confessed to killing Sarah. He purportedly thought the entire scenario was an audition for a horror film that Anthony was making, and he wanted to get a role in it. Nevertheless, this did not help him, and the police forwarded the case to court. Preston agreed to a plea deal under which he would testify against his friend. Since he did not participate in the actual murder, he was charged with concealing a crime and disposing of the body, ultimately receiving 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15. As for Liam, he continued to claim his innocence. His lawyer clung to the fact that Sarah's body was never found, arguing there was no evidence she was dead. He also stuck to the story about the horror film audition. However, these dubious arguments failed to convince the jury of Liam's innocence. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years. After the verdict, his mother continued to insist on her son's innocence, giving various interviews. She adhered to the theory that Sarah had indeed run away from home and that Sarah should apologize to him when she returns. Sarah's father, who never had the chance to bury his daughter, decided to memorialize her in another way. He established a scholarship for students passionate about the arts, naming it in honor of Sarah.